an immense mega project in which over 150 countries from around the world participated. New airports, motorways, and seaports were promised. Dreams of building a future like Dubai and Singapore were shown. But today, in these same countries, these mega projects appear incomplete and the dreams shattered. Some are burdened by debt, while others present a picture of ruins. This was China's biggest global mega project, named the Belt and Road Initiative. There was a time when everyone called it the project of the century, but today it is called a geopolitical disaster. The greatest loss has been to the poor countries that were shown these beautiful dreams. So, what happened that people are now pointing fingers at a superpower like China? Welcome to the Global Compass. In 2013, when Chinese President Xi Jinping announced the Belt and Road Initiative, or BRI for short, it was called the biggest plan of the century. Its purpose was to create a new Silk Road that would connect Asia, Africa, and Europe through railway lines, highways, and ports. China's mission was to bring developing nations onto the path of development and to present China as a global leader. China's vision surprised the world. More than 140 countries expressed interest in the plan, and many poor countries immediately began taking loans from China. Before long, China had spent $1.2 trillion on the project. This money was given in the form of loans to countries that Western banks or the IMF had considered too risky to lend to. However, the reality of the BRI soon began to surface. It was not just an infrastructure project, but a geopolitical and economic agenda for China. In reality, China's industrial capacity had grown so much had increased. This meant they were producing millions of engineers annually, but it was becoming difficult to find them jobs in China. This is when China devised a plan to export its workforce and expand its geopolitical power. The plan was to provide loans to poor countries for BRI projects, and then use China's own industrial capacity on those projects to benefit its own people. The biggest issue with the BRI is its debt trap diplomacy. This means China gave so many loans to poor countries that they could never repay them. In exchange, these countries would be forced to hand over their land or vital infrastructure to China. The biggest example of this is Sri Lanka. Its leaders were shown a dream that if they built a new port on the Indian Ocean, it could become a regional trade hub like Dubai. Sri Lanka's issue was that they already had the port of Colombo. It was a transshipment hub where containers from large vessels were transferred to smaller ships. China tempted Sri Lanka to build a new deep-water port, named Hambantota Port, on the busy shipping route from the Strait of Malacca to the Suez Canal. When Sri Lanka decided to take a $1.3 billion loan from China, China gradually revealed its conditions. The condition was that only Chinese firms would construct this port. The interest on the loans was low, but if the loan wasn't repaid, China had the power to seize the project. Construction was completed, but the Hambantota port never became operational. Feasibility studies had shown that there was no real need for a port there in the first place, and the situation was so bad that only 30 to 40 ships stopped over there in an entire year. Since the port wasn't running, repaying the loan became a major problem. The situation escalated to the point that in 2017, as per the agreement, Sri Lanka had to hand over the port to a Chinese company for 99 years. Now the entire revenue from that port belongs to China, and Sri Lanka, in a way, lost a piece of its sovereignty. However, Sri Lanka wasn't the only one to fall into this trap. The small African nation of Zambia, which relies solely on copper exports, has also been ensnared. Its leaders dreamed of modernizing their economy and started several projects with the help of Chinese loans. They were told that the terms for loans from the IMF and Western countries were too strict. But they never considered the downside of the Chinese loan conditions, which stated that if the loan wasn't repaid, China would seize their assets. The price for these dreams was very high. By 2020, 43% of Zambia's total debt was owed to China alone. In November 2020, when the COVID-19 pandemic wiped out trade and tourism and the demand for copper dropped, Zambia defaulted. The BRI also created several projects that were useless. These are known as white elephant projects, projects that look grand and magnificent, but have no practical benefit. Montenegro, a small European country, took a $1 billion loan from China in 2014 to build the Barbeljare Highway. However, the project's planning was so poor that after cutting through mountains, the money for this small section of the highway ran out. Now there is only a 41-kilometer road that leads nowhere, The amount of money spent on this small section of road was so immense that it shook the country's entire economy. Montenegro's debt is now more than 80% of its GDP, and it has had to seek help from the IMF and the European Union. In addition to the Hambantota port, Sri Lanka also built an airport to encourage local development. The Matala Rajapaksa International Airport was built for $200 million also with a loan from China. But airlines weren't interested and passengers didn't come. Today, the airport is known as the world's emptiest airport because it has so few flights. Sometimes elephants and other animals can even be seen roaming its runways. Ecuador, a small country on the west coast of South America, has also been caught in the BRI's trap. To solve its energy crisis, it partnered with China to build the Coca-Codo-Sinclair Dam for $2.6 billion. However, Chinese contractors ignored quality standards during construction, and it was later revealed that officials had been bribed. As a result, the dam's walls now have more than 17,000 cracks. The project is at risk of collapsing at any moment, which would not only be an economic disaster, but a huge human and environmental crisis as well. Then came Pakistan's turn. The CPEC, or China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, was a $60 billion project for Pakistan. Pakistan had hoped that CPEC would bring electricity, jobs, and development, but most projects were either delayed or failed. The people of Gwadar protested against the lack of water and electricity and against the Chinese government. The promise of jobs wasn't fulfilled, and Pakistan's debt burden kept growing. Today, the Gwadar port, which was once under Pakistan's authority, is now with China. The Chinese take 91% of its revenue, while only the remaining 9% goes to Pakistan. The BRI suffered its biggest setback when Italy, the only G7 country that joined it, announced its withdrawal from the initiative. China had not given Italy direct cash loans, but had signed MOUs, memorandums of understanding, that promised Chinese investment and trade deals. However, most of the projects never materialized, and Italy gained very little economically. This is why Italy later called it a big mistake and left the BRI. Besides Italy, countries like Malaysia, Myanmar, Bangladesh, and Nepal also either canceled some Belt and Road projects or renegotiated their terms. Seeing this failure, the United States and Europe have started their own alternative initiatives, such as the PGII, Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment, and Europe's Global Gateway Program. These initiatives promise transparent and low-interest loans to help countries avoid China's debt trap. As a result, relations between China and Russia have grown stronger. After the war against Ukraine, Russia felt isolated and tried to get closer to China. Through the BRI, this is creating a new geopolitical axis that could become a challenge to American dominance. After 10 years and trillions of dollars spent, the Belt and Road Initiative is now considered the biggest foreign policy failure in modern history. The main reason for this failure was that the BRI was never about development. It was about serving China's own interests. China wanted to export its surplus industrial capacity, gain access to raw materials, and increase its geopolitical power. Also, most of the loans China gave were in Chinese yuan, because China wanted to promote its own currency as a global currency. Today, the Belt and Road Initiative stands at a crossroads. China is rebranding it as BRI 2.0 with a greater focus on digital infrastructure, green energy, and sustainable projects. However, the world is no longer willing to believe in promises alone. Countries will now only accept projects that offer real economic benefits, not just an increased debt burden. The question remains, did China gain anything from the BRI, despite the heavy losses to other countries? The truth is, things didn't go exactly as China had planned. China wanted to increase its global control, but instead the BRI branded it with a reputation for debt trap diplomacy. The BRI has also slowed down China's own economy. It now has the liability of collecting billions of dollars in loans and managing the projects it has seized. On the other hand, through the BRI, China has gained a direct or indirect stake in more than 100 ports worldwide, which is very beneficial for its export economy. If the entire BRI network is completed, it will be the longest road, rail, and sea connection from Asia to Europe, covering 65% of the world's population.